I'm going for quite a big passage here, and before we do that, it's worth us looking at the presence, the physical presence of Hamlet on the stage, which does go back to earlier on, and we skipped over, but shouldn't have done, this thing that Hamlet says, a little more than kin and less than kind, and again, picking up on or punning with the idea that he is a member of family, of Claudius's family. Notice as well that possessive adjective my from Claudius, and Hamlet's response to it. He actually makes his own pun. It's quite odd. He's kind of auto-fool. He picks up on the last thing he said and then works that in. Look, he does the same thing with the Queen. We've discussed just now how he does it with the word common, and then he the Queen uses the word seems ever so casually, and then Hamlet repeats it, spits it back at her, tauntingly repeats it. Seems, madam, nay it is, I know not, seems. And here Hamlet, as you'll know, he's present on the stage even before he speaks, dressed in black, characteristically, almost inevitably portrayed as a remote, distant figure set apart from the rest of the court, not just by where he's standing, but also by his clothes. So a 17th century, very early 17th century audience would have immediately recognised the almost character type of melancholy, the melancholic, exhibiting the contemptus mundi, that scorn for the court as Cicero would have imagined it, and that scorn for the people who want to go back to those classical values. He also, therefore, with that contempt for the world, demolishes the pretense that it is anything like the way it looks. He exposes with his words the idea that there is any truth in what we think is the case, much like as he does when he's joshing around with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and thinking what the world's gone honest. No, that's not really our news. And so he says that his clothing, black and dismal though it is, cannot denote me truly. And he still repeats the words seem, that these indeed seem. And then he caps it with a rhyme, hinting, and not just using a rhyme for the sake of a rhyme, but also reminding us that Hamlet does fancy himself, among his many other attributes, as a poet. I have that within which passes show these but the trappings and the suits of woe. Now, the Queen clearly hasn't made much headway, and now the King attempts to do it. And the King does so with an extraordinary speech, what we might call deliberative rhetoric. His attempt to persuade Hamlet not only that he needs to get over his father, but also that he needs to stay in Denmark. As we know from later, he's needed because the king, it's almost because the king is suspicious that one keeps one's enemies closer to one than one's friends. Laertes hit and go, we're not worried about him. Hamlet needs to become the most observed of all observers. Now, look at the way he does it. We've seen the king already use a range of rhetorical tricks, internal rhymes, that kind of thing. And now we have a glimpse of chiasmus, that idea that you run the grammar of a phrase backwards when you repeat it in a kind of X shape. So idea A links up with idea A over there, but it's interrupted by B and B. And you get that with your father lost a father, that father lost his implicit father. And notice the way the king uses reason. You cannot speak of reason to the Dane and lose your voice, but then actually leaps so far in his argument as to almost look irrational. Yes, on the one hand, and this is an Aristotle trick of rhetoric, on the one hand, I do understand my opponent's view that lamenting one's father is a good idea. It is sweet and commendable. But, and here we go on the on the attack. You'll know from theology essays, there are many who think that capital punishment is a deterrent. And then you advance the argument. And then he gets just plain abusive. 'Tis unmanly grief. It shows the will most incorrect to heaven, like he cares. Oh, my offence is rank, it smells to the heavens, he says later. And then he piles it on in a kind of a list, a heart unfortified or mind impatient. He mocks Hamlet as the kind of person who is not showing the kind of maturity, the kind of grown-up approach to the world that will lead him far in politics. It's that career in politics that the king does anticipate. And following on from that possessive adjective of my son, he says, think of us as of a father. And then he deals with the politics in a way that Hamlet never addresses. Hamlet almost never considers himself as the future king. He does in Act 5, Scene 1, talk about how the Queen popped in between the election and my hopes. And also you could argue that the king doesn't completely have the right to nominate a successor. That, after all, will fall on the king's death to the electors of the court of Elsinore. But here we are. For let the world take note, he does need a little bit of consent from the populace. You are the most immediate to our throne, and with no less nobility of love than that which dearest father bears his son. And there he sets himself up as the equivalent of a father. And going back to school in Wittenberg, it is most retrograde, backwards, to our desire. And again, you have that need to control Hamlet simply by keeping him there. Note the order of these entreaties. The Queen, again with another yussive subjunctive, I-U-S-S. Let me just write that down. Yussive subjunctive there. It's a kind of let's do this, but it's a kind of command. Let not thy mother lose her prayers, Hamlet. I pray thee, stay with us. So the mother has a completely his mother has a completely different reason for wanting to keep Hamlet there, and that we assume is the love a mother has to a son, and that's that. And the king, meanwhile, has his statecrafty reasons for doing it. Note, I hinted, and here's a little glass of wine, that the king likes to raise at least a glass, if not several, when things go his way. You could argue this is a kind of statecraft, the kind of bread and circuses. Let's keep the masses entertained. Let's get them sloshed and I can do my business. And the king's roused, the heavens shall bruit again, bespeaking earthly thunder. Come away. And they all leave, leaving the stage to Hamlet and to us.